Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar. We initially started advertising this webinar before COVID-19 with the title, End Your Hiring Headache. But we felt this title and the content needed to be tweaked a bit for the current situation. So now we're calling it Selecting Talent for Today and Beyond, How to Find and Develop the Right Person for the Right Job. My name is Kat Duco, and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. I work alongside a team of key account managers to support our customers across the Asia-Pacific region. We would like this to be an interactive webinar, and I'll be assisting with questions and comments throughout. But due to the number of participants, we will keep everyone on mute to avoid any background noise. So please participate using the questions box feature on your GoToWebinar panel. Before we get started, I'll quickly introduce you to the Myers-Briggs Company. Our mission is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And we deliver on our mission through various approaches, through our consulting solutions, research services, certification training, and through our range of assessments. Our goal is to maximize the performance of leaders, teams, and organizations through the use of our psychometric tools and professional services. We are going on our second year as a certified B Corp, which means we balance purpose with profit to use our business as a force for good. We're really proud to be a part of the B Corp community, and we do encourage you to learn more about it. Today's webinar will run for about an hour and will be facilitated by Dr. Martin Bolt, Senior Director of Professional Services and Psychologist at the Myers-Briggs Company. Martin has extensive experience working with organizations across the Asia-Pacific region in areas including team effectiveness and executive leadership development, organizational change, virtual training solutions, workplace well-being, and resilience. He's also our lead assessment certification trainer. Today, Martin will be sharing insights, research, and different approaches for identifying and developing the right talent for job fit and for organizational culture fit. And with that, I will turn you over to Martin.
Thanks, Kat, and thank you for everyone who's joined our webinar today. And we are indeed in interesting times, it goes without saying, and the world of work has been and continues to evolve, resulting in employers and employees needing to identify the kind of skills that's going to enable individuals and organizations to adapt to change, technology, and currently responding to the disruption and indeed the crisis that many people might find ourselves in as a result of the current COVID-19 pandemic. But I did want to start here with thinking about a call to action and selecting for skills, and some work done by the World Economic Forum looked at beyond sort of the technology advances and other situational changes that organizations and employers were faced with. What are some key characteristics that all people, or the majority of the workforce, need to be able to develop and have actionable in order to meet the needs of the future workforce? And by future, the starting point was really looking at this year, 2020. And the key characteristics that the World Economic Forum identified was people and organizations need to be able to develop flexibility to adapt to the changes that are occurring and indeed implementing changes that need to occur. Creativity, being able to exercise ethical decision-making, and having social skills that enable people to relate effectively within their organizations and externally to the organizations. And these set of characteristics were identified as important because they sit over and above technical skills and other knowledge skills that people obviously need to bring to the workplace. But what I found interesting is that this set of characteristics was initially identified in about 2017, and the World Economic Forum really made the point that organizations need to be selecting and developing these skills for 2020. So thinking about challenges that you might be faced with, particularly relating to talent selection, I wanted to give this as an opportunity to have some input and thoughts from those attending the webinar today. Just have a think about what is a challenge you are currently facing with respect to talent selection for your business or for your clients. So if you could take a moment to just record your responses, it could be a one word or a brief statement about a challenge that you're currently facing. And when we get some of those responses in, I'll invite Kat in a few moments to share what are some of the challenges that you've shared. But while you're entering your responses, we can start by considering what have been some common challenges businesses have reported for many years up until very recently as part of their talent selection. So first, considering the most common challenges selecting talent, and I should say this is before what we're currently living and working through with the COVID-19 crisis. In recent years, it's become nearly impossible to avoid media headlines or thought leader commentaries and industry reports that fixate on the impending and dramatic changes to our economy and way of work as a result of technology disruption. And I've read much about artificial intelligence and automation and what that means for people in the workplace. And for many of us, and I'm sure many of you are involved in HR decision making, as well as business decision making about challenges that you might face with who to hire, when to hire. Much of the impact that is being promoted in the media about artificial intelligence and automation really hasn't descended across all organisations, and in fact most of our clients and colleagues who are faced with making HR decisions talk about much of the challenges are more about subtle changes in the talent landscape that have emerged in the last decade or so. So I'll focus on just a few of those core talent related pain points that have up until recently been the main challenges for many people making decisions about talent selection or people in the HR decision-making field. The first is most industries have for a number of years reported there isn't a large pool of candidates vying for a single position. And in fact, some research from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that an overall unemployment rate up until very recently was only 3.5%. And with that, the number is even lower for management, so approximately 1.8%, or for professionals, 1.7%. So essentially, organisations and people hiring talent have been faced with the challenge of not having enough people available or interested in looking for work. And it's also linked to some ideas or thoughts or even speculations that younger generations are more likely to job hop or change from one occupation to the next. But in actual fact, the research shows the average tenure of the younger generations in the workplace is just as long as it was for the younger workers in the 1980s. Also, it has been the case that most qualified candidates, those that many organisations are seeking to select and develop, have for the most part stayed in the jobs that they're currently in, and they're often reluctant to change jobs or require a lot of coaxing and encouragement and incentivization to make changes. So low unemployment has definitely been part of the landscape and a challenge for many people in selection. A second challenge for quite some time has we've received more and more feedback that specific job titles in the workplace often don't convey the real meaning of what's involved in working in that environment. And we've seen this even through some of our related work around career planning, that when people are looking at particular occupations and definitions of them, they don't necessarily reflect what is involved in the current version of that occupation in a real world setting. And so people are now needing to think of, and organisations needing to think of, hiring people not for a job role, but a set of responsibilities. And if I took one example of a job title that has emerged and become a lot more important, particularly in recruitment, is the role of data scientist. Now, if you think about the title data scientist and what that job might entail, it actually has multiple definitions depending on the professional background or function within a business that a person has. Some people might focus on the importance of understanding statistics and building statistical models as part of that job, whereas another person might view the data scientist needs to be able to synthesize data from a variety of sources and tell a compelling story that can be understood by stakeholders in a business. So depending on a person's perspective of what a data scientist role actually involves, it can be a lot more complex and diverse than what the job title itself highlights. So hiring the best applicant for a data scientist role will actually mean finding someone who's able to cover a broader range of responsibilities than simply what the job title indicates. And this may be a challenge not just for large organisations, but probably even more so for small to medium-sized organisations, where employees are required more and more to work cross-functionally and wear multiple hats. So historically, it's been useful to initially screen candidates for a particular job simply by looking at just their university qualifications and mapping that to a job title. But what we're actually seeing is the baseline levels of technical skill are still often required, but due to the ambiguity in what the job really entails when someone joins an organisation, it becomes even more critical for those making the hiring and selecting decisions to understand which core characteristics, such as personality, values, and intellectual abilities, are going to be required for someone entering that job role in the short and longer term. And then the third challenge that we've seen is we are in an era where job applicants have access to an abundance of job-related information at their fingertips, much of it through the internet and freely available. So for high volume or particularly popular positions, a web search can provide guidance to an applicant about what to expect during the selection process, or what qualities an employer is likely to value, and how to maximise their own chances of being successful in that job application. For example, management consulting candidates are often asked to prepare or work through case studies as part of their job interviews. And now they are able to easily study endless business cases, and even at high levels in organisations, and experienced candidates can get an idea of what might be involved in an intensive leadership selection process. So as most organisations still rely on an in-person interview for making their final hiring decision, there is a large body of evidence showing that hiring managers or people conducting the interviews will often overestimate their ability to identify the critical characteristics required for someone's success in a job role. And also during the interview, many interviewers can be easily influenced by non-job related factors, such as whether they just even have rapport with the person. So many savvy job applicants can actually create a situation and, for want of a better word, deceive the interviewers with relative ease by preparing for jobs and preparing for the interviews in such a way that you get more of a staged version of the person rather than their authentic self during the interview. So I just want to emphasize that hiring decisions can be improved or benefited by having more than one source of information, such as a job interview, as the method for selecting people for an organisation. So hopefully it's given you a chance to put your thoughts together about a challenge that you're currently facing with talent selection. And I might check in with Kat now just to hear what sort of challenges have been shared. Is there anything that's come through, Kat, in the chat functions?
Yes, a couple of things have come through here. So one person said individuals are increasingly able to perform well in interviews and questionnaires, but doesn't follow through with job attitudes and performance. Another is there are a lot of people unemployed now, so more people applying for work. Along those same lines, screening applicants or limited pool of people with the skills needed. And final one here is a decreased budget for hiring.
Great. So firstly, thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts on that. And I guess it gives everyone maybe a window into some of the challenges that you've shared and whether in fact they're challenges that many of us might have encountered. And it is interesting timing for even our webinar, because some of the challenges that I've just been talking about may have shifted quite dramatically. So what are we seeing as emerging and current issues in the climate, particularly the COVID-19 era that we're currently working and living through? And what are some of the consequences that's likely to have for talent selection? Well, here's a list of some of the things that we're seeing, and I think it's already been flagged in some of the thoughts you just shared in your chat responses. First of all, there is going to be, and has already started, increased unemployment compared to what has been the case for easily the last decade. So there will be more applicants in the job market looking for opportunities, which now means that those making hiring decisions are going to have to work with a larger pool. Also, those who are currently employed, the initial feedback is they're less likely to change their job role or move organisations, particularly in times of uncertainty. So some of the candidates that you might actually be needing or wanting for your organisation may be reluctant to move, and they're going to need some real incentive or good reasons to make that change. We're also aware that many organisations at present have a freeze on hiring, and although that's going to be real and play a part in talent selection, it's quite possible though that is a temporary freeze as organisations start to open up and businesses start to re-engage with clients. They're going to need people who are able to support what the business is delivering. Also, having the best people post the pandemic era. So we will be seeing a need where some organisations will have to reorient or pivot or deliver things in a different way, and that might actually involve having different capabilities and skills in the workforce that we didn't necessarily appreciate or need before going into this era with COVID-19. We're also hearing that where job recruitment and selection has continued through the last few weeks, there is a greater reliance on technology, particularly video interviewing. And what we have seen, and from previous research done over many years, is that the technology can work in favour or in unfavourable ways for the applicant and the interviewer. And there's some well-established research that having technical hitches, such as the audio dropping out or the video not working, can automatically create a bias against the job applicant, regardless of their capabilities or skills, which sometimes the interviewers are less aware of, that technical issue has created that bias. Also, learning about job applicants purely through a virtual medium, such as a video interview, or more organisations are expecting recorded presentations by job applicants. That can actually leave a big gap in understanding the person from an interpersonal perspective and what they're like to actually deal with in reality. We're all aware that a video interview or a recording can allow for a very staged or manufactured example of the person. And through virtual interviews, there is less opportunity to pick up on some important cues that you'd otherwise get by in-person interactions. There's also an increased need for information about the person to minimise virtual hiring errors. So all the information that you'd normally get in an in-person interview is diluted and is missing some key essential inputs that help a hiring manager or a hiring employer know whether they've got the full picture of the person. And finally, we're seeing more and more people who maybe prior to the restrictions with COVID-19 had accepted job offers and are now moving into organisations. They're doing this for the first time with virtual onboarding, having never met the people they're going to work with, but they are expected to start operating in the role. or indeed helping new hires acclimatise to the world of work and the new organisation that they're in, is all being done in a very virtual format. So these are current, emerging and real challenges that we're also seeing as part of the talent selection process. Although it may sound like I'm painting a picture of doom and gloom, in practice, most organisations, though, have a system in place that generally works, meaning that it gets available talent into most open positions. But for many organisations, there is room for improvement, and we know that particularly for smaller to mid-sized organisations, it is difficult to gather the time and resources to systematically follow up on new hires, and also to ensure that they're hitting the mark when they come into the organisation and their role. The effects of consistently not finding the right person for the job start to really be felt organically in the business. For example, poor performers may be pushed out or see the writing on the wall, and the resulting higher turnover in the organisation means that jobs are not getting done. And all of those obstacles of finding the right fit that I was talking about earlier have to be navigated again and again, and the selection processes have to continue searching for who could replace the people who are leaving the organisation. If an organisation is systematically selecting the wrong candidates, and this is a greater risk now where more virtual methods of interviewing and selection are relied on, it can result in having people join the organisation or sticking in the organisation where there isn't a strong fit for them with the culture, and that can ultimately result in having more toxic cultures within the workplace and people feeling trapped that they're working in environments that don't bring the best out in them or don't give them a clear understanding of how to perform at their best. And when this does occur, it does have a real impact on not just the work environment, but the performance of the organisation. And as we consider all of the issues I was just discussing, but then apply them to leadership roles, the stakes become even higher. So cultivating effective leaders is actually a core focus of many successful organisations, and now is even more important than ever during a period of uncertainty and unpredictability. But we consistently find, and research supports, that whilst critical decision makers often have a picture in their mind of what a good leader is like, they can have difficulty articulating in very concrete or tangible terms what is effective leadership. So at the most basic level, effective leaders do two things. They establish a vision and direction for their team as a whole, and they demonstrate concern and support for individual team members. Now, this is not just a nice idea to have. This is based on 80 years of research that has demonstrated the fundamental importance of these two core concepts. And what we also see is from the business research that evidence suggests that roughly 2/3 of leaders fail to meet performance objectives or are considered incompetent by their team. So while selecting or promoting the wrong leaders has all the cost implications that we discussed earlier for non-leadership staff, those implications are magnified given the smaller talent pool and the larger span of control offered by leadership roles. So depending on the role, one toxic or incompetent leader can have a cascading negative influence, not just on their own team, but on the wider organisation and the wider organisation's performance. So you might like to take a moment to reflect on, there's no need to share, but maybe reflect on what percentage of leaders within your organisation do you currently see as being effective? So far, I've focused quite a lot on what can go wrong as you try to find the right talent for your organisation. But the question becomes, given these and many other challenges, how do we improve the odds of finding the right person for the jobs that we have available or that we're needing to identify in our organisation? So of course, there are a huge number of approaches businesses and organisations can take to tackle the issue. But I'm going to focus on the value proposition of using validated psychological assessments as part of the selection process. And in particular, I'll be pinpointing assessments that give information and insights about personality and ability skills that have been found to help increase the accuracy of hiring decisions. And the benefit of assessments is that they provide another lens into the key characteristics related to what a successful person will need or brings to their job role in the organisation, and also ways of motivating and managing them so that there can be greater retention of the people that are needed for that organisation or that business. So when we are providing consulting and guidance to organisations who are wanting to improve their talent selection methods, we see three core areas that hiring decision makers need to have an accurate read of, and how they relate to the role they're hiring for, as well as the organisation and cultural environment that talent's going to be moving into. So these areas include a comprehensive picture of a job applicant's cognitive abilities or their intellectual capacity, their personality, and their emotional intelligence. All of these characteristics are not easy to consistently and accurately evaluate in a job interview or on a resume. In fact, they become increasingly harder to evaluate, particularly through just virtual interactions or online interactions with job applicants. Yet, all of these areas are significant predictors of a person's potential success when they're assessed with the key needs of the job and the organisation in mind. And I do make that point that the assessments shouldn't be used for the sake of just having an assessment. A key part is selecting the right assessment for the job role and organisational requirements. So while there are now a growing number of assessment methods and tools marketed to assess these characteristics, as a psychologist, I always want to ensure that we are offering our clients and using assessments that have evidence that they are reliable and valid predictors of these characteristics. And these assessments are not designed to replace existing recruitment approaches, such as interviews or work simulation activities, but rather they are designed to augment and add to the overall information that's used in the decision of who to hire and who not to hire. It's also important to keep in mind the popularity of selecting employees with what we are hearing these days with a growth mindset. If you're not familiar with the growth mindset, it's the underlying belief and idea that an employee has that they can grow and develop their capabilities, in contrast to an employee who has a fixed mindset who believes their skills and talents are set and largely cannot be modified or improved through development. So the idea is that organisations need employees who are continually striving to develop and adapt to a rapidly changing work environment. In fact, our current situation and the current era we find ourselves in, where organisations have had to dramatically shift their operating methods during the COVID era, really highlights the importance for having a workforce and people in the workforce who are able to adapt and grow to the new conditions they're presented with. So let's have a look at the assessments and how we would use them with a given organisation. So first of all, honing in on cognitive abilities. What we do know from years of research and experience is that depending on the job role and its complexity, a job applicant will need a particular level of ability or intellectual ability to manage the demands of the role. Some job roles don't have high levels of complexity in problem solving and decision making, whereas other jobs are very complex. For example, a new entrant into an organisation in an administrative or support role can be expected to learn a role that has high levels of structure and probably comes with some routine and repetition, but not a requirement for high levels of complex problem solving or decision making. That's where it becomes important to identify if the job applicant has adequate cognitive abilities to meet those demands, but there's no expectation for them to be highly with high levels of intellectual ability, because they may actually find that a role that doesn't come with some complexity could be somewhat boring or frustrating. In contrast, if you're looking to select someone into a management or senior leadership role, they will be expected to deal with wide range of information, a wide range of issues, and to be able to synthesize those and make informed decisions. So the complexity is higher. This is where it's important to establish that people being selected for these roles have an adequate level of intellectual ability in order to meet the demands of that particular role. So we use the Mental Agility series, which not only measure and evaluate a job applicant's intellectual ability in a set of skills such as their language skills, numeracy skills, and problem-solving attention, but it also asks each applicant to rate their level of understanding about their ability. So these particular assessments not only give you the ability outcome, but does the applicant rate their ability realistically, or do they have a tendency to overrate their capabilities or underrate their capabilities? And that becomes important because it can help you understand whether the job applicant is going to come in and apply their actual ability in a realistic way, or whether there's a risk of them making decisions based on overestimating their skills. So cognitive abilities are part of the picture, but they don't answer all parts of what's important when finding the best talent. This is where we look at the relevance of including a valid measure of personality for job selection. And personality, we know, again, from years of research and practical experience, influences not just job performance in the role, but also motivation and retention within an organisation and a particular role. We have used for many years the CPI 260 personality assessment, and it provides information on 29 characteristics that can be used by decision makers to help predict performance, culture fit, and in-role development of job applicants. To give a high-level summary of what the CPI gives information and insights into, it gives a picture of a job applicant's interpersonal style, what's their natural and preferred way of dealing with other people, how they will manage themselves with respect to rules and expectations, what's their level of achievement orientation, how they, a set of personal characteristics that shape how they interact with others and the job environment. The CPI also has some research measures of work-related behaviours, the behaviours that many workplaces and organisations need to get a read of when taking on a new person. And also the CPI for many decades has been used as part of leadership selection and development methods. So what distinguishes the CPI for selection from other personality assessments? Well, first, many personality assessments have a primary focus of gaining an understanding of self, where a person completes a personality measure to learn about who they are and how they might be different or similar to other people. This approach is quite useful for development applications, and an example of a personality assessment that's very good for self-development, particularly for activities such as team building, would be the Myers-Briggs type indicator. It measures and helps a person identify what their underlying personality preferences are and how they are different or similar to other people. But this is not the kind of way we need to use a personality measure for recruitment and selection. And this is where the CPI is different to a tool such as the Myers-Briggs type indicator. The CPI was constructed to focus on how others are likely to perceive a person, something we commonly refer to as our reputation. And reputation is particularly important at work and in leadership roles. For instance, if you think your managerial style is warm and inviting, but your direct reports or your team are hesitant to ask you questions because you come across as hurried or task-focused, this gap between reputation and perceived self serve as a blind spot for a person and ultimately can hurt their performance. So over 60 years of research sitting behind the CPI, we have a strong pool of evidence indicating that the CPI can predict job performance and potential across a range of occupational roles and also in a range of leadership roles. Further, the decision-making and professional development purposes that the CPI can be applied to, it has been found to be useful for both selection, identifying who might be a good fit for a job role in an organisational climate, as well as giving valid information about where a person can further develop themselves. So it can be considered as both a selection and a development tool. Now turning our attention to looking at the emotional and social intelligence of job applicants. And again, these are the capabilities that usually distinguish the adequate performers from the exceptional performers when they join an organisation. So emotional and social intelligence is what differentiates also the okay leaders from the most successful leaders. And we've actually found from research that these emotional and social skills become even more important in leadership roles. So the instrument and assessment that we use to accurately measure emotional intelligence is the EQI 2.0. It's designed to give valid information about how effectively a person understands their own emotions, how effectively they respond to the emotions of others, how they use their emotions in decision making, and how they use their emotions to deal with challenge and adversity, so their emotional resilience. The EQI has been developed from well put together studies of how emotional intelligence relates to performance in a wide range of settings, academic, workplace, and also personal and social settings. And it has more than 30 years of research behind it. The EQI is the first scientifically developed measure of emotional intelligence. So as an assessment, it gives us an opportunity to compare people's EQ profiles with given job and occupational roles to see how similar or different they are, and also what they might need to further develop when going into a particular occupation or job role. So how is this relevant for selecting and developing leaders? So let's now take a few steps into the future. And in this future, you've incorporated assessments as part of your talent selection process, and you also have a pool of effective leaders capable of growing and adapting in order to maximally benefit your organisation. However, even though you have those core characteristics available at the hiring stage, there is still work to be done. And now you're faced with the equally challenging prospect of guiding the development of your leaders. Now, what we know is that organisations around the world heavily invest in leadership development. In fact, the Harvard Business Review did an estimate that organisations spend approximately $356 billion on leadership development programs worldwide. But despite this significant investment, other research by Brandon and Hall Group found that 75% of organisations actually question the effectiveness of the leadership programs and how effectively they have contributed to the development of their leaders. So what are the challenges of leadership development today, and how do these assessments play a part in it? So you might recall that many organisations not only are trying to find effective leaders, but also develop them. And we've migrated from concrete and relatively straightforward world of technical skills that many leaders are selected for. And now leaders are needing to focus on developing critical soft skills, or the human skills that I was pointing to in the World Economic Forum earlier. This is where careful consideration of what characteristics to select for, or to select for leadership, and also which characteristics could be potentially developed within the role. So assessments like the CPI and the EQI can help provide guidance in this regard. We've actually seen that organisations achieve success by focusing development on specific and observable behaviours that arise from underlying personality characteristics measured by tools like the CPI. So one example would be the personality characteristic of sociability. While it sounds more impressive to focus on leadership development program on broad concepts such as how to make leaders more creative in their approach, leaders are better able to incorporate simple incremental changes into their everyday work as part of their development. And this is where assessments that I've been describing, particularly the CPI and the EQI, play a role in helping an individual leader focus their development efforts and offer some very focused, individualized support for leadership coaching. So just as you use the assessments as part of a hiring decision making, results from the same assessments can help guide coaching conversations and also provide another lens into the behavioural tendencies of a leader and what might be affecting their reputation as a leader with the people they're leading. So it becomes critical to ensure that with limited resources that many HR managers and practitioners are faced with, is to look for some proven and meaningful ways to help leaders develop without having to invest in extensive and broad scope leadership programs. So using these established assessments can minimize confusion or help individual leaders really pinpoint what it is that they are best developing or where they put their development efforts and resources. We've also seen that when leaders have an accurate read of their capabilities and characteristics as a leader from these assessments, it decreases the likelihood that they might be take up on the latest leadership or management fad that might be running through an organisation. Now, not all fads are unhelpful, but it can be difficult to connect the learning from the latest leadership fad to an individual leader's development. Whereas assessments like the CPI and EQI really pinpoint for the leader what it is that's working for them and what could improve. So as I start to bring our webinar session to a wrap here, I do want to conduct one more interactive opportunity with all of you who are attending, and just to take a moment at the descriptions of these characteristics on the screen, and for you to think about which of these characteristics do you view as the most critical to effective leadership. Now, I'm going to ask all of you to just choose one and to type the one that you think is most important into the chat box. I know it's possibly painful to pick just one, but because all of these characteristics have some level of importance for leadership. But just take a moment to write your vote of which of these you think is most important in the chat function. And as they come through, I might ask Kat just to read out which ones were being nominated as part of our audience today. So Kat, have any responses come through yet?
Yeah, a few have come through. There's several for empathy and flexibility. I'm also seeing responsibility and insightfulness listed as well.
Okay, good. So again, it's not unanimous, but you can hear some themes emerging through there. Now, we deliberately selected these characteristics because from some recent research we have been doing on what distinguishes effective leaders, all of these characteristics were in the top of the crop, if you like, or top selected characteristics for leadership. However, some of them are easier to develop and some of them are harder to develop, which comes back to the concept of which ones do you want to hire for and which ones could you potentially develop when someone comes into the role. Now, all of these characteristics are measured by the CPI 260 and some of them are measured by the EQI. And while we view these basic personality characteristics as relatively fixed, that is, they're part of who you are, in many cases we can coach individual leaders on specific behaviours that are likely to arise from these characteristics. It's just that these characteristics and their associated behavioural tendencies vary in terms of how coachable they may be. For instance, a couple of you mentioned insightfulness, which really refers to someone's ability to understand what makes other people tick at a psychological level, or what is going on in their head as they interact with the world. This could safely be considered something that would be fairly hard to develop within someone. But in contrast, the other characteristic of empathy, which a number of you also mentioned, relates to how well someone connects to the feelings and emotions of others, and how well they represent and reflect that understanding to the people that they're dealing with. So while you can certainly envisage friends or colleagues who are naturally more empathetic than others, it turns out that we can actually coach behaviours to reflect empathy fairly easily. So empathy is one of the more developable capabilities. For instance, the simple act of being present during interactions and demonstrating active listening and observing behaviour, and demonstrating that you hear where someone is coming from without judgment, are basic behaviours that can be practiced and developed. So whilst we might select a person who doesn't have high rated levels of empathy at the hiring stage, if that is important in their role, particularly in a leadership role, it is something that they could develop once they're in the role. So what I'm hoping you've gained from our webinar today is it's possible to enhance your selection processes by using well researched and valid measures of personality, emotional intelligence and ability, and that in incorporating these assessments and with guided interpretation from people who are qualified to use these tools, it should help deal with some of the pain points that we highlighted at the beginning of our webinar, but also pain points that are likely to be emerging as a result of the environment that we're all currently operating in. Also, as part of our session today, we did want to share with you some takeaways which are part of the webinar handouts. So by joining today's webinar, you will find in the handouts section a copy of this document, the 7 Critical Competencies for Effective and Productive Leaders. So this summarises the research that our organisation has undertaken to pinpoint what are some of those key capabilities and competencies that organisations need to hone in on when looking for leaders and selecting them. We also have included as part of the handouts today some information about the assessments that I've been talking about, the CPI, the EQI, and the Mental Agility series. So if you wanted to know more about those, make sure you download and access those handouts. So whilst there are probably a wide range of issues that add to our discussion or could add to our discussion on how to deal with talent selection in our current era, what I did want to just leave you with the key takeaways is that in order to build a strong talent pool in your organisation or as HR decision makers, you can improve the accuracy of talent selection as well as onboarding and development by using valid psychological assessments as part of the decision-making process. Also, these assessments give an insight into how a person might operate and fit within the cultural context of your organisation. Finally, the assessments can identify both strengths and opportunities of your new hires or people that you're selecting and help you determine the impact of these on potential in future roles in your organisations. All of these assessments are backed by data and research, and they also have the versatility of addressing emerging trends that organisations are having to deal with. Now, you may have some more questions as a result of what we shared with you today, but at this point, I did want to hand back to Kat because there'll be an opportunity to take some questions, but hopefully that's given you some information and further thoughts about how you might improve and enhance your talent selection methods today, and also preparing for the era that organisations are gearing up for, which is following our current post-COVID-19 world. So Kat, I'll hand back to you now if you'd like to take the next steps.
Great, thanks Martin, and thank you all again for joining the webinar today. As Martin just mentioned, we will be taking questions in a few moments, which you can submit through the questions box on your GoToWebinar side panel. And while we wait for those to come through, I'll share a bit more information about our company, including some new resources that we have for virtual teams available through our website. For those of you that are new to the Myers-Briggs company, we work with our clients in a few different ways. We offer consulting services where one of our experienced consultants, like Martin, can get to know your organization and design and deliver a customized solution to meet your business requirements. We can also partner with you and be as involved as you want us to be in your projects, whether that's co-facilitating development programs or helping you behind the scenes with designing your talent selection strategy to select the right people for your business. Or if you want to manage all aspects of design and delivery yourself, you can join our assessment certification programs to gain the knowledge and tools that you need to build that capability internally. We're most well known for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, but as you've learned today, we do have other tools to support the entire talent lifecycle, including talent selection tools, emotional intelligence tools, and leadership 360s. If you want more information about our assessments and services, our website's a great place to start. And I would like to call special attention to our new web pages with resources for developing your virtual workforce. From our homepage, you can click the first banner, which looks like the one pictured on the screen, to navigate to the virtual workforce pages, which include information on virtual team building workshops and complementary resources such as tip sheets, quick guides, infographics, and of course, we have more complimentary webinars that you can attend. Our next free webinar will be on June 2nd on the topic of engaging virtual delivery. Martin will be facilitating that and sharing tips on adapting in-person classroom events and designing virtual events. With this webinar, we will be sending the slides and recording from today's webinar to each of you in the next couple of business days. You'll also receive a link to a very brief online survey in the next hour, which should just take a couple minutes to complete, and we would really appreciate your feedback. So now let's turn to questions, and there are a few that have come through. The first one, Martin, is, are there ways to use assessments to screen large groups of applicants?
Yes, Kat, so it's a good point about timing and sequencing of when these assessments might be most useful. So there's a few different ways to approach it. For those who might be faced with situations where they've got a big volume of applicants and they're wanting to narrow down that group to, or shortlist that group to a smaller group to do some further evaluations such as interviewing or other selection evaluations. What we find is it's helpful to use, at least start with the cognitive ability testing as an entry point. That, I guess, gives you an opportunity to get a read of where the job applicants are with respect to intellectual capability to deal with the demands of the role. And from that point, if there is a shortlist, that's when it can be useful then to use the other assessments, such as the personality-based ones with the CPI or the EQI, to gain a picture of the other elements of how the shortlist applicants may fit with the job role and cultural and work environment. Where we've also seen helpful to introduce the assessments is also as part of selecting at the final stage of recruitment. So as organisations, you may have other methods for shortlisting large groups, and where the CPI and the ability testing, the EQI come in handy is they provide additional information that can help inform interview questions, particularly if the applicants have taken those assessments before the interviews.
Great, thanks, Martin. Another question is, how do I figure out which characteristics are trainable and which aren't?
Yeah, and it's not as easy as saying this is trainable and this is not trainable. I think the starting point when we're working with organisations, particularly helping them identify what characteristics they're needing and want to select for and what characteristics could be developed, is to first of all look at the job role and to look at the behaviours that the job role is calling on. And for example, if it does involve, the behaviours are to build rapport with customers or clients, and doing that through in-person or even phone and virtual interactions, it's really identifying what are the behaviours that a successful job applicant need to demonstrate, then saying, okay, what are the underlying personality characteristics that support those behaviours? And as I mentioned, behaviours such as demonstrating empathy to a client or a colleague, they can be shaped and developed through support and development and coaching. Where it comes into identifying who's creative or selecting for creativity, that's a much more complex set of capabilities. And that's not as simple as turning on a coaching session of how to be more creative. So that's where it really calls on looking for what are the underlying personality characteristics someone would need to have that incline them to think in creative ways. But probably the key part is look at the behaviours that are needed in the role, and then work out how much those behaviours can be trained or coached or developed. And if those behaviours are things that people really need to show up with, they're the ones that you want to select for, as opposed to factoring in that they can be developed later on. Hopefully that helps, Kat.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And I do want to mention, too, that we offer free consultations with our lead consultants, including Martin. So if there's specific things that you're trying to tackle within your own business, or you want to talk through what your specific challenges are with your selection process, we can certainly schedule that time with Martin or another available consultant. So just want to throw that in there. And I know we're running short on time, but there's another question that came through that I think is really important to address. I actually get this quite a bit on the phone with customers, and that is, can you use the MBTI instead of the CPI for recruitment?
Yes, that is a common question we get, Kat. So first thing is the MBTI is a validated measure of personality preferences, and it's been well researched and regarded for application in development settings. So this is where you're wanting someone to learn about their personality and then apply it for development. The MBTI, though, was never designed for, nor should it ever be used for, determining selection or recruitment decisions. And that's largely because it doesn't measure skill or abilities or competence in the use of personality preferences. The CPI, in contrast, does have a long track record of predicting behaviours within job settings and job roles. So that's why it is appropriate to use the CPI for recruitment and selection. The other thing that the CPI does have built into it that the MBTI doesn't is the CPI's measures of response style. So you can actually pick up if an applicant has answered the CPI in a way that it looks either in a socially desirable or trying to present themselves in an overly favourable way, or whether it looks like a genuine set of results. Whereas the MBTI doesn't have that built into it, and there's no way of identifying if someone's answered the MBTI according to their underlying preferences or not. So the CPI is definitely the tool that we use when we're looking at decisions around hiring and selection. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you, Martin. So yes, we are against our time here. If we didn't get to your question, we will be following up with everyone individually to make sure that your questions are answered. So we do appreciate your time today. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks again, Martin, for the presentation.
Thanks, Kat.
Have a good day, everyone.